For this tutorial, we're going to learn how to draw the texture of paper with graphite pencils. To draw this texture, the first step is to prepare a reference before we start, which is quite simple. You can easily find a piece of paper at home. Then set up a fixed light source and take pictures of the paper from different angles to find the perspective and shape that you prefer. You will need a good light source that creates an interesting shadow. Perhaps the daylight in your room is already suitable, otherwise you can use artificial light to help. You can crumple a piece of paper, as I did, instead of a photo of it for this exercise and place it in front of you. We must draw from real-life object because this way we can better examine and analyze it. However, if you prefer a less challenging approach, using a photo as a reference is perfectly fine. Your reference doesn't have to be a crumpled piece of paper like mine. It can be any paper object. The techniques we're using are aimed at capturing the overall pattern and texture of the paper. Now let's start drawing the initial sketch. As usual, I recommend using an H or HB pencil to create your initial design on paper based on your reference to draw outlines and prominent edges. Begin by drawing a medium circle in the center of your page. Make sure to draw the lines lightly and softly, as we will need to erase these guidelines later. Next, draw a vertical line to establish the center of the circle. Proceed by drawing an ellipse, keeping the imaginary axis in mind. Alternatively, you can simply draw a horizontal line that intersects the vertical line resembling a plus sign. Using your reference shape, outline the corners and edges of the paper. Pay close attention to the folds and creases. While we use the circle to guide the outline, the overall shape of the crumpled paper isn't a complete circle. Take enough time for this step because besides the outlines, you should also draw some important folds. This will make it easier for you to draw the shadows in the next step, as you can orient yourself by the folds. In my sketch, I didn't capture the shadow on the table, but you can do or skip if you are not up for it. You may feel a little overwhelmed at first. How do you keep track of all the shadows and folds? Take your time and divide your paper into individual areas that you can work on one by one. Once you've drawn the outline based on your reference image, erase the initial guidelines to prepare for the next step, which is shading. Most of the drawing process relies heavily on shading, so the accuracy of the initial sketch is not as critical at this stage. Using an HB pencil, begin to create faint lines and shadows. At this point, our objective is to identify the edges and borders of the various shapes and planes within the drawing. Start by focusing on larger planes that are prominently in the center of your view. As you progress, you can then refine the details, adding smaller elements such as folds and wrinkles in the final stages of your drawing. If you're drawing from a reference like I am, try squinting your eyes and temporarily ignore the finer details. Focus on capturing the overall shapes and general forms in your design. This is a practical and essential drawing technique that every instructor should teach their students. When we look at an image that is slightly blurred and less detailed, our brains naturally simplify the details, allowing us to perceive the general composition more clearly. This technique helps us create an image that represents what's in front of us, even if it's quite abstract and lacking in the specifics. In the shading process, apply one layer of shadow over another. The key point of this exercise is to develop a range of grays using softer pencil pressure. To achieve hatching effects and more pronounced lines, increase the pressure on your pencil as you layer. By stacking multiple layers of shadow, you can create depth and a sense of transparency in your drawing. Start by shading the darker areas that indicate depressions while emphasizing the lines as you progress. These sections are crucial for showcasing the dimensions and depth of your image. To create the darkest shadows, apply more pressure with your round-tipped pencil. It's essential to change your pencils and adjust your grip regularly to achieve the best results. Use the tip of the pencil to define the edges of the shadows on the paper and then shade using the sides of the pencil for a softer effect. You can also incorporate the hatching technique for some areas of shading. With both the round and sharp tips of the pencil, carefully create skillful lines that blend together. Add a light shadow on the surface where the object is resting. Since the light is shining from behind, the cast shadow will be projected towards us in the front. I apply this shadow quickly and lightly to better define the borders and lower edges of the shape. In areas where the light is the strongest, use darker and sharper lines to indicate contrast. You will quickly notice that as we apply more gray colors, they make a big difference in the drawing. Even if you only apply it very lightly, it gives the drawing much more depth. It's not all bad to go back to the first parts you drew in this step and fix things. This exercise is not about getting everything perfect right away, but about correctly estimating colors and depths while drawing. Before we start, take at least 5 minutes and try to identify the individual colors on your reference. Surprisingly, a simple white paper's shadow can contain a lot of different colors. In my case, I see a light blue, a little bit of yellow or green, and perhaps a light lavender in the shadows. All of these colors have a gray version in grayscale. So since we can only create different types of grays with graphite pencil, we need to recognize the level of darkness of each one of these grays. To create highlight points, gently lift a layer of graphite with an eraser, allowing the light to reflect off those areas. Using specific lines will enhance the depiction of folds and breaks on the surface of the paper. Remember that faded areas indicate softness, while distinct and sharper lines suggest brittleness and hardness. In this artwork, we primarily emphasize sharp lines and edges. You can also observe the gradation in the reference photo, which helps create a sense of depth and dimension. Aside from one or two minor areas, we won't be dealing with round and curved surfaces. Therefore, when shading, it's important to ensure that your shadows convey the texture of the paper to the viewer's eye. A crumpled ball of paper, although circular and slightly crushed, will appear flattened. Continue shading the unfinished areas using an HB pencil. Gradually darken the shaded sections with the same HB pencil and use a sharper HB pencil to emphasize the deeper gaps and shadows. Initially present the shadows lightly, then gradually build up the darker areas by layering thin pencil strokes on top of each other. Use the tip of the pencil for more precise application. The light-dark contrasts are missing and making everything look pretty flat. But that's not a problem, as we will bring them back with the next pencils. After completing the initial step with the HB pencil, we move on to the next phase, where we will use a darker pencil to enhance the contrast of the image by creating deeper shadows and adding depth to the drawing. At this stage, the artwork should already suggest the shape and texture of the paper, indicating that we have overcome the most challenging aspects. Now our focus will be on darkening some areas and highlighting others to achieve a balanced composition. We will create a wider range of gray tones to represent the different dimensions of the shape more accurately. Additionally, we'll be adding more details to the drawing. In this phase, there is no need to squint your eyes. Instead, focus intently on the lines and details and implement them carefully. In the previous step, we viewed the image as a whole while simultaneously working on different parts to achieve a form that reflects the general shadows of a crumpled ball of paper. During that phase, I transitioned from one area to another, focusing on locating the various planes. Now, however, it's time to concentrate on each small section and add detailed elements. If you frequently step back to observe the overall picture, all these intricate details can overwhelm your brain. For this stage, you might consider using a 2B or 3B pencil. Finally, create the definitive lines and highlights with a sharp 2B or 3B pencil to enhance the depth and clarity of your artwork. Now that our main drawing is nearly complete, let's return to the cast shadow to enhance it and make it darker. The areas closest to the object should be darker, while those further away can be lighter. I recommend starting this process with an HB pencil and then transitioning to a 3B pencil for a deeper effect. You can also use a white polychrome pencil as demonstrated in the previous tutorial to define the highlights. This will enhance the contrast and overall impact of your drawing. If you're using a colored pencil, this technique will be especially beneficial. If you're using white paper, focus on maximizing the contrast to emphasize the highlights. You need to indicate the highlights using the white color of the paper. For the final step, I want to use a 6B pencil to intensify the shadows and deepen the darkness in my work. However, I won't press the pencil too hard against the paper. Softer pencils like 5B, 6B, or 8B can create a shiny surface on your paper if too much pressure is applied. Instead, apply the shadows gradually and layer by layer for the best effect. This step is optional. You can achieve a good final result using only a 3B pencil if you prefer. It's important to identify and implement different grays in different tones at the end of your drawing. If you like, you can take a photo of your finished drawing at the end and put a black and white filter over it. This way you can analyze afterward how you implemented the shadows and brightness. I would recommend doing this only at the end. This way, you do not become dependent on such hacks during the drawing process and truly learn how to see it for yourself better. Finally, as always, take a moment to double check your drawing and see if there are any adjustments you can make. And that's it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Until next time, and have fun drawing.